Welcome to Further Ed with your host, David Schnurman, accomplished entrepreneur, innovator, and educator. Each week, Further Ed will offer an intimate look at trailblazing visionaries who have transformed the landscape of business and society at large. And now we introduce our guests and our host, David Schnurman.
Hi, welcome to Further Ed. I'm your host, David Schnurman. Today we're going to be meeting with the founders of Docracy. Further Ed looks at EdTech startups as well as all types of startups that are focused on personal growth. And today we're going to talk about Docracy, how they got started, what their mission is, and learn a little bit about Matt and John. Matt and John, thank you for being here today.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
So you started Docracy at one of those, I guess, 48-hour EdTech type, or just tech startups. Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's this thing called a hackathon.
Hackathons.
Yeah, in the startup world where you pile everybody into one room and over a 24-hour period and try to write something new, and it's kind of fun. It's cool. Like, it gets a bit crazy. Like, it seems like a terrible idea around 2 and 3 in the morning. Yeah, and the kind of quality of what you're working on goes way down. But
was that your first hackathon?
That was
from it. That was our last. That was our last.
That was our last hackathon.
Because we realized that we were too old for it about halfway through.
yeah. The average age wasn't working in our favor there. So we wanted to do it though because we just weren't, like, we had this idea for a while and we just weren't working on it. We had so much other stuff we were working on. So we're like, let's just give ourselves a deadline. Like, it was partially deadline, partially like the atmosphere of doing it. We would be around all these people who we could talk to about the idea as soon as we were done. So we'd find out, we hoped, in one weekend. Yeah. First of all, could we get like a working prototype done? And two, was it a terrible idea? So.
Are either of you developers?
Both of us.
Both of us. Yeah. So you are developers. Okay. Because a lot of non-developers go to hackathons, and unless they know a developer or they meet up with a developer at the hackathon, it's pretty hard to.
It's mostly developers who are at those things because it's so hard to try to put together some team that, and even then for the non-developer or team member, there's not much to do in that one day. Okay. You know, like, it's really about the hacking and the writing of the code. Yeah.
Well, if you look to, just before we get into the company, these first of all, there's a lot of incubators out there, and then there's hackathons, and there's different types of schools, and then you can get funds that kind of are sort of like incubators. It's sort of because there's, to one degree, it's much easier than ever to create a company. Mm-hmm. 2, there's not a lot of good opportunities out there. And 3, the game has changed in terms of what the possibilities are that exist, and obviously social media-wise and learning-wise and connecting-wise. And you said you've been to many of them. Mm-hmm. So. Do you agree or disagree with what I'm saying, and how can you build on that?
Yeah, absolutely, it is true. So the idea that a really small team can build something that could become potentially enormous. There's also just the joy of the hack. These things sort of existed before there was such a kind of big money in it. And that idea of, like, what can you do in one day? It can often be more than you expect, or to work on that bite-sized problem is kind of. It's kind of a good feeling. If you work a job where you're, we have like a 5-year plan on this great big project, it's sort of refreshing to just like, let's just get something done in one day. But yeah, there is such a larger support network now. The earliest sort of hacking events that we attended, there were never venture capital people present at those. But so now there are.
How many have you attended? Just it was always together?
Yeah, often
Best
together
friends?
We've gone. I mean, I feel we've only been to maybe 3 or 4 sort of really sanctioned, sort of proper hackathons. But this concept has existed for a long time, and so maybe many more just sort of like. Just sort of like, a bunch of people getting together just to like work on some crazy stuff, and but maybe as many as 5 or 6 of these.
So you guys, high school friends, college friends, just randomly?
College,
okay.
We're Canadian.
The old school way of meeting.
Yeah.
You say Canadian?
Yeah, University of Toronto is where we met. Yeah.
Hey,
and then we were kind of coincidentally both moving down to New York around the same time. Great. So then we got to know each other more once we were down here.
So I guess have you ever worked at a real job?
Many.
Yep, several. It's been a while now that we've worked. We've been working on our own companies for, I think, probably 6-7 years now. But before that, a series of jobs, startups, big companies, Columbia, like just the full range of experiences from ultra small to very big to academic, the whole thing.
So you said 6 or 7, I guess, companies that you started or that you worked on?
No, that many years.
Okay.
Yeah. So
any companies that were successful or that were successful failures?
Yeah. Well, we started a kind of a mobile dev shop in around 2005, I guess, and that was kind of before the iPhone was around, but there was still a few phones you could write apps for. It was sort of really an early time for that. But so we sort of kind of got into it sideways. We sort of just had to sort of introduced to it randomly, this concept of sort of writing these apps for mobile phones. So we tried it out, And it was actually a real kind of going concern. We sold a bunch of apps in 2006, 2007, then we got into iPhone and Android. And so we did that for quite a while. And that's actually kind of what led us to the Docracy idea. We can tell you more about that, how that sort of, our experiences doing that, being a small dev shop sort of led to that. But that's what we did.
And building a product for your own need or issue or problem obviously leads to that. And sort of like, it's the ultimate entrepreneur building a business for entrepreneurs is sort of what you're doing, because you realize there's a lot of issues as an entrepreneur, a lot of challenges you have. One of them is legal, and being an attorney who doesn't practice and runs a company, I sort of come into those a lot. And on one hand, I'm like, well, I could figure this out on my own because I'm an attorney. But on the other hand, I go to LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer, and now DocStock is an opportunity, and I use their software because a lot of it's boilerplate anyways. So take me to this hackathon night. You guys are sitting there. You're like, okay, did you come in with the idea of the product? And now, if you could, just tell us in 30-second pitch or whatever what the product is, so we're on the same page and sort of how it happened.
Sure. So Docracy is open source legal documents with free e-signing. And the idea being that there wasn't really a good repository or centralized, store of this kind of information, of contracts, or even just of this kind of legal information. And that's what we were looking for. We wanted to be users of the product, like you said. We ran this business, and we wanted to find a place for these documents, but also discussion around the documents, like who's using them, who have they worked for, all this kind of thing.
Yeah, and a big inspiration to our sort of version of the idea is based on the site GitHub. I don't know if you know much about GitHub. Yeah, so that's an open source model for software, but it's really based on this sort of ownership model. So someone puts something up and it's theirs and they own it and no one can change it. But people can take a copy of it essentially and make changes to it. And if those are good changes, that owner can bring them back in. And so we thought that really works as for law. That really feels like the right match for law as well. Whereas there's been prior attempts to sort of do kind of almost like a Wikipedia of law, where it's like, it's like a wiki model, anyone can change anything. And that just seems too chaotic and too crazy, and you sort of lose the trust because there's no ownership and you don't know who changed what or for what reasons. So that was sort of the underpinning of how this could work for OS. We thought this makes sense if there's this strong ownership model, so whose opinion essentially you're looking at.
So Rocket Lawyer or LegalZoom, those are just, you can get this one document and that's it. The difference is you're saying these are documents that are living, breathing documents actually that people are adding to and changing. Take it, caveat emptor, take it for what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And where standards emerge, where they make sense, great. If not, fine. Like it's a set of tools and content to allow the communities to determine what makes sense for them. So if it makes sense for there to be a standardized NDA for the New York tech scene, great. Like hopefully that would emerge, and hopefully social pressure would start to enforce that, where it's like, I don't want to sign that other NDA you sent me because I'm used to signing this one. But we're not enforcing any of that. We just want to make the information and the tools to manage it available.
So what's more important, getting people to use it or getting attorneys to put their documents on? Obviously, you need
it's sort of a chicken and egg thing. Yeah. So it's sort of both. As the usage grows, then more lawyers are.
Are you disclosing how many attorneys or people are using it?
We're over 20,000 users now.
20,001. I just signed up.
Yeah, okay, 20,001. So that's great. We're willing to disclose 20,001 then. So and like a fairly small.
How many documents?
We're I think close to 500 documents
500?
now.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the way it works in the model that John was describing too is that the person who puts an original document up, something that's a new document, usually leads to a bunch of other kind of variants of that as people take a copy, make a small change, and so on. So documents get modified for regional differences. They get modified like a full, like a full-time employment agreement becomes a part-time one, things like that. So it's a cascade effect from one sort of original document to a bunch of customized, variants.
So where you are today, how long ago was the hackathon that you came?
It was about a year and a half ago.
Although we didn't launch the site at that time because it just we had advice too. It was a prototype, so it wasn't ready for people to really sort of lean on and use. So we didn't launch it officially until December of that year.
I assume where you are today and where you were then, it's a completely different mold of the idea. Does that sound fair?
It's actually still fairly true to the original idea, and we're willing to change. Like we are evaluating it, and it's a refined. It's probably 4 or 5 refinements through the idea, like, so versions of the idea, but it's still the same core idea. It's still that kind of ownership model for legal documents.
So you mentioned e-signature. I actually tried that. I actually tried that demo thing. What's unique about that?
The difference with our e-signatures is that we use the same tools that we use to track versions of documents, like public documents. We use that to track versions in negotiation or in the signing. So it's actually a negotiation tool as much as it is a signing tool.
Okay.
So if I send you a document to sign and you want to make a change to it, you can actually change it if I've allowed you to, and I'll see a new version of the document with all the redlining automatically done and so on. And then if that's fine, we both sign it and we see a full version of that negotiation there, like what we talked about,
so it's sort of approving the changes by your e-signature.
Yeah.
And the other reason why we feel that this is core to the whole overall product is that sort of idea of that kind of standardization, that if a community agrees that this sort of NDA is a good standard, this is a good sort of New York tech NDA that everyone's going to use, then if you do it via the signing service, then you don't, if I have to modify it a bit before I send it to you, you don't even have to read the whole thing. You can just say like, oh, I'm really familiar with that NDA and I can just see that he dropped this clause or added this one little thing in there. And so that really tightens everything up, rather than having to immediately sort of pour through the doc to make sure there's nothing weird in there, nothing you didn't expect, and to have to think about how to do look at differences with Microsoft Word or whatever, and all the problems related to that. This just cleans that up and makes it really, really tight.
Yeah, that's when the efficiencies are really the most dramatic, is when the document is under control of the system from start to finish. So you find the document, you modify it for your purposes, and you sign it. But the history is all handled by a trusted third party, meaning the site.
And I assume the business model is you're going to eventually introduce some sort of pro version where if you want to do X amount of documents, it costs X amount per month.
Yeah, there seems to be a bunch of team features and just sort of control of signing within an organization. There's also interesting things you can do around what's been happening to a document as it's been signed in an organization. So we have this sales contract which exists in a template form, which right now in most organizations is just a Word file in a shared folder somewhere. Now it's in our system, and as it's being signed, we're tracking what changed when and by who. So you can see across your entire organization, well, actually, we're dropping this clause most times when we sign this. Why? Like, who's dropping that? And we probably shouldn't. So let's talk about that, things like that. So.
And I saw in your some interviews you had online, I think TechCrunch, that you went through the venture capital process and you raised money. How much money have you raised to date?
We raised $650 last year in, I guess, late October, early November.
And so is your goal with that to get to what point?
What we talked about, it was to develop the tools necessary for that open repository of documents, get the community, figure out who the right kind of person would be to contribute documents and use the documents, and then build this whole signing system, which we've just finished. So that was basically what the seed money was for.
Who would you end up raising money through?
First Round Capital was our lead. Yeah, which was great because that was actually one of the judges of the hackathon.
Oh, fantastic.
So that's from First Round, so they were one of the first people we talked to, and we went through that whole process with sort of the idea being that, like, we're vetting this idea with you as well. Like, we're happy to not do this idea if it doesn't make sense for some reason, but through that process, we kind of convinced ourselves that it was worth pursuing. So
it seems like you need lawyers to be working with you, or at least working with a lot of have lawyers throughout the industries and using and getting feedback from. How has that process been?
Yeah, and our first hire was a lawyer as well, and to sort of manage that community process, and just to talk to other lawyers and get it, and because we also, of course, we settled in on the code pretty heavily since that's sort of our natural strength, and so we brought a lawyer on, Veronica, and she sort of handles community and just sort of looks at where we're missing things, like where do we need to go and make sure we sort of get coverage on these areas, that kind of stuff.
The hard thing is, I can relate to you guys, by the way. I don't know if you know anything about Further Ed, but we just launched something called TeachHome, which is essentially a free software for teachers to turn YouTube class videos into a classroom. And so we just did it based on the idea, sort of like that Google 20% rule, just whatever, but at every turn it's like, well, what's the business model? How do you get teachers? How do you get people to use it? What has been the bigger challenges that you faced?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you're building this sort of community thing where you need two groups, you need this sort of end user to come together with some expert class or someone who can really help there, that's always tricky because you start with nothing and you can't convince one side to be there unless the other side's already there. You know? So you have to sort of try to, miraculously grow those things side by side. So I feel like, I'm sure
you're spending money in marketing, or you just sort of...
Not very much, no. It was mostly kind of guerrilla marketing or just sort of community social network type marketing. But we, there's sort of that initial phase where we said, like, we just have to, one way or the other, find friendly parties. We have to have some content here. We have to get that initial baseline amount of content, so it's not just an empty container. And then from that point on, it was mostly about just finding, we did a lot of sort of guest blogging, just kind of got our name out there any way possible with blogs that were appropriate to our community. Really get active on Twitter and Facebook, all the standard stuff. Another benefit that we're starting to see now is search engine optimization, because another kind of our original thesis was that if you just search Google for legal document stuff, you get really bad results generally. You get a lot of ads, you get sort of content farms from the 90s, that haven't really been updated since then. And so we thought if we do this well, people should be linking to these open source documents. The full text is there, and we should start climbing those search rankings. And we're starting to see that, and especially in maybe the last 6 months, we're seeing sort of steady growth on the search side. So that's bringing in people now, and sort of making our job a little easier.
So just to challenge you guys for a second on the idea and who you guys are. Obviously, I don't know you. We just met today. But my challenge would be that maybe this is not core enough to who you are as individuals, you're developers. Do you ever sit down and they like, how did I get stuck in a legal document company?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny you mentioned that, because we do have that conversation. Every once in a while we're like, wait, because someone will ask us like, well, you guys are both lawyers, right? No, we're not lawyers. And like,
what do you mean?
And then and how did you get into this? You're like, yeah, how did we get into this? There are times where we really question are we the right people to do this and all this stuff? But what seems to be the end result of these conversations is that it's actually good that we don't have this background, in that our perspective is purely consumer. And I think that comes through in the product as well, that when you go to a LegalZoom or something like that, it's sort of a product like, designed by lawyers in some way. Like, it has that feel of like, we're giving you legal services by lawyers, and here they are, it's a little cheaper than you're used to, and so on.
Rocket Lawyer is much better than LegalZoom. Right?
And Rocket Lawyer is a
design.
Absolutely. But we think in general, it's still that thing where it's like, we're taking what already happens with lawyers, we're taking the whole legal business, and we're just sort of putting that online, as opposed to sort of rethinking to an extent. And we're not saying throw it all out. Lawyers aren't, yes, lawyers are still very important, but just that idea, like, how would you grow this from the beginning with the internet? Like, this information, how best should it be available on the internet, and what can be the real sort of big win there?
But I'd still challenge you to say, yes, maybe changing legal documents, I think there's probably something bigger there that you can potentially look at, something that drives you guys more on a daily basis. For me, and I try to get as big as possible, it's sort of changing the way we learn. And like, when you deal with education system, there's a revolution going on, so you can sort of, the idealism there.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, the big picture is this idea that for the regular people, especially people whether just trying to do regular legal stuff in their daily life, or especially if they're trying to be an entrepreneur or a small business, that this stuff is really scary and frightening, and that the tendencies for it just kind of get worse and worse and more complicated and everything. And so the ability to potentially reverse that and empower that group,
and I agree with you there, but
that's really big.
My question is, though, for somebody who's overwhelmed by law, wouldn't I sort of be more confused by seeing 15 versions of a document, and instead of just going to something like LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer where there's just one I don't have to worry about it. Like,
no, you can go far beyond that. We think that the problem with LegalZoom is that there it sits, one single template behind a paywall, and you don't know anything about it. It was drafted by someone, you don't know why, you don't know what their point of view was. Here, this is perhaps many things, but each of them sort of has its niche and its point of view. Like, here's a web design contract by a really famous web designer, and he says and he has on his blog, he's talking about it, and this document really exists. He says, this is exactly the contract I use. I get rid of these terms that just make the client frightened and don't really help. So he explains exactly his rationale behind it. And so now that becomes a really useful and really nuanced thing, as opposed to just, I went and bought a document.
Who is the target market of who would be paying? Like, who is the target market? What is the person? Is it a business person? Is it a consumer who wants a will? I mean, do you have an idea of like who would be the best person for?
I mean, ultimately, it's anybody who deals with contracts, meaning that people who don't have any contract can come and find a contract. But in terms of our target market, people would just want to manage their contracts on the system as well. So
is someone a business then?
Yeah, it's a business too.
So you're not looking. But you're saying, if I'm looking to do a will, would I go to?
Not right now. Not right now. You wouldn't necessarily do a will.
What's the main contract you have on
right now? Like, it's freelancers is the main, like, so freelance designers, programmers, photographers, like anybody who deals with contracts, but not necessarily in large dollar transactions.
And based on your software, do you see an advantage so far? What you've seen with the versioning to any other Rocket Lawyer or Google Scholar or Google Legal or whatever it is? Or is it a nice add-on that potentially in the future it can lead to something?
No, we think that this versioning and this ownership model and everything is an advantage, and the openness of it as well. For example, there's a lot of Quora questions where it's like, oh, this is my situation, what kind of conduct should I use?
Yeah.
And the answer will be, this is the right thing for you, and it points right to a Docacy document. Like that idea that any discussion that happens anywhere can funnel into this open repository. That seems to be driving people towards what they need, and not getting hung up on this sort of like, oh, there's all these different versions, I don't get it. Because there's all that extra information, metadata, nuance. Whereas, if you go to the other sites, you just buy a really generic template.
And sometimes that's what people want because they're so busy in life. And so, let me just say this me talking and asking these questions, it's from a fellow entrepreneur who asked the same question. I say the same thing to myself every single day. I launched the product and I launched a new version. And I'm so excited. And the next day, I'm like, now what? What was I supposed to do today? And it's exciting, yet you need to be challenged as much as possible, especially on TV, just so you can sort of make sure this is where you want to go.
Absolutely, yeah, and there's, the challenge is there every day. And obviously we talked to a lot of VCs and everything too, so we're used to getting grilled on every detail of this thing. But it's one thing about being an entrepreneur that I think maybe people who haven't done it before don't get, is that it's not really about the work or the uncertainty as much as people kind of don't care or don't get your idea until it's successful. So you have to sort of fight through that early phase of basically people saying, why, what are you doing, what for, and so you need a lot of sort of belief.
Although it's not the most important thing, it's an important thing in terms of the world we live in, is the revenue model, because that's sort of like the point system, and that's how you're able to get there. How soon are you going to focus on that part of it?
It's coming next. That'll be
what time frame are we talking about here?
The next quarter, the first half of next year.
And adding that sort of pro version. And there's always going to be a free version, I assume, and there's a pro version.
Yep, exactly.
And then at what point do you think you would need to raise your second round of financing?
Somewhere in there. Yeah, we're sort of figuring that out right now. We have a few options. So,
how did you like? Every day you're learning in this process. What part of this have you loved learning the most? Has it been the raising money? Has it been the developing? Has it been the legal side? Has it been the marketing side?
Maybe that marketing side has been really huge. Just sort of really having to buckle down and think about how do you get this out there, And we had sort of spectacular failures and good successes too, but it wasn't easy. And there was some dark days, sort of like, man, how do we get anyone to care?
And here's the thing: there's so many more dark days ahead, and so that's why they say you have to be passionate. But it's just understanding that. And I think you had said this in your past interview, it's not necessarily making the right decision, it's just making a decision, because that will lead to something else.
Yeah, and they're learning something about it,
And everybody's so busy in their own life, to get them to care, they hate you until they love you type
exactly, Yeah. But go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I was going to. I guess a couple of things. One, you alluded to it there, but the idea of what does it feel like to make a decision in the face of all this uncertainty when there's an unlimited number of things you can do, and what is the next thing you're going to do? And the idea that it's what does it feel like to not have all the answers and still make a decision? And when do you know you're doing that right? And how do you determine that's been very important, because we're from an engineering background, so we want to have as much information as possible. But what we're finding doing this is that actually if you wait too long, you gather too much information, then actually you are making the wrong decision because you're making no decisions. So where's that sweet spot? That's been sort of what we figured out is let's get to 80% right here probably and do something, So
are you focusing most of your time since you're how many people do you have now?
We're four.
Four
full-time.
So are you guys coding all the time, or you find
a lot of the time
a chef in a restaurant ends up doing more marketing than cooking at that point?
Yeah, we're sort of all over the place, and that's a skill that we've learned. I think when we first started this and we were raising money and programming at the same time, it was really bad. I was running very bad software, and it was just sort of too much to do at once. But now we can get in and out of that mode faster, I think.
Sure.
So
what questions are in your mind now in terms of you're sort of confused and sort of what the next steps are?
I think our question, what I'm thinking of all the time is what's the thing that's going to get us not just the next little step, but what's the order of magnitude thing? What's the thing that's going to change the perceptions with a whole another group of people and take us from this to 10 times that? So that's always what we're trying to do. And when you're first doing that, you're going from 10 people to 100 people, and then you get used to that level. And you never really get satisfied. So there's that sort of feeling of you never really make progress because you get used to whatever level you're at.
And it is strange to truly feel, it is true plateaus. You'll start at nobody, then you have, there's a trickle, and then, now it's pretty good. And then, we had a kind of a big rise at the end of the summer. We had some good marketing and everything. And it's oh, wow, we're at this next level. And we didn't drop down from there, but then it plateaued again, you know.
Yeah.
And then I feel like just recently we've sort of started to get to the next level. But yeah, it's so yeah, there's always that fight of like, how do we go to the next, you know? And it always feels like you're just barely hanging on. But if you can keep doing that, you know, it's sort of survival leads to success. Yeah.
And I would agree with that. And it would, because we all look to, it's sort of like winning the lottery. We look to the companies that are in the headlines that have hit that not 10 times, but 1,000 times, and we say, what the hell did they do? I don't get it. Why is it not happening here?
I take a lot of comfort in an interview that was done with the guy who started Pinterest, and he talked in detail about the first 2 years of running that company, especially the first year, and it was just brutal. Like it was just nobody. Like I'm sure every piece of advice he got, and it was all good advice, was
Same thing with Groupon.
It's not working. Yeah, it's not working. Just
they almost went out of business.
Do something
There
else.
has to be a social helping.
And it was like, imagine what that feels like. That's what we're feeling, you know. So that's a big part of it. Is just getting used to the fact that people don't think your idea is worth pursuing, or that, you know, people aren't paying attention, and like just making that next step. So other people who now are suddenly like overnight successes actually had that. What we're, you know, everybody goes through that 2-year period where it's like.
And if you are successful, no one will remember. No one but you will remember the sort of like the difficult days.
And sometimes people, they don't even want to talk about it, right? They're like, oh yeah, it was great. Yeah, the whole thing was great. I knew it was going to work.
Well, and I'll say this on the final note. It's also knowing that, you know, if you look around, there's thousands and thousands of tech startups now.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands. It's sort of, you know, 99% of them are going to be failed, and you don't want to be that one. But even if you are that one, I believe this is the best way to live your, you know, to try something and fail in doing it. And if you end up working somewhere else or whatever, this is the best way to, you're sort of still in school.
Yeah.
So Matt, thank you. John, thank you.
Thanks very much.
It's great, and I look forward to watching your success and potentially working together.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you once again for watching Further Ed.
You've been watching Further Ed with your host, David Schnurman. Mr. Schnurman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions about this program, please send an email to info@furthered.com.